Hello, good people of YouTube. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Misha and I'm a DevOps engineer from the Netherlands. And some of you guys have been asking about my configuration of the terminal and Neovim and wanted to know how I've done it. So I've been actually wanting to make this video for over a year, but now the time has finally come. I'm going to be showing you how I've configured everything, the principles behind it, and how I do it. And that's because I've spent a lot of time configuring my workflow and perfecting it for my own needs, because I work as a DevOps engineer, cloud engineer, mainly with Kubernetes. I write a lot of YAML code, infrastructure as code. I write Go, Python, and I do take my notes in my Zettelkasten, and I do everything as much as possible from the command line, because I have this tenet of using a keyboard as much as possible and trying not to use the mouse. And that is one of the main principles that I use for my workflow. So if that sounds interesting to you, then sit back and relax, and I'm going to use this mind map that I created as a guide through the process. And this mind map will also be available for download for you if you want to read the extra notes that I've put in here as well. So without further ado, let's go. And I wanted to start with just reading out my sort of philosophy behind my workflow that I wrote down here above this image generated by ChatGPT. I wish I could draw like that, but I can't. So my workflow is completely based on the command line. I therefore have very little programs or tools running on the graphical side of the OS, whether it be macOS or Linux. All I need is a terminal and a web browser, but a window manager is a big bonus to my productivity. My main philosophy is to have a minimalistic workflow which uses very little resources. It should be a distraction-free, keyboard-centered and efficient environment to do my best work. So like I said, I try to be keyboard-centered. I use a happy hacking keyboard, which has some very special setup of where the control keys are, and I can reach the escape key with my pinky. So it's completely optimized for Vim and having a Vim-based workflow. And that is what I basically built everything around. I started building this several years ago, and I've refined it with many iterations as I went along. And today, it has been fairly stable for over the past 6-8 months. I haven't done many changes, but the thing is, the workflow is always under continuous development, and I'm always making small improvements here and there. So if we start on the mind map, the starting point is going to be GitHub and my dotfiles repo. This is where everything begins, and this is also completely available to the public. Let's see, Misha dotfiles here. I keep my dotfiles in a public repo. They can be found on my GitHub account, mishavandenberg/dotfiles. And here I keep everything from my bash RC to my Alacritty config, my Vim config, everything is in there. I'm going to be going through a few of these in the video today, but if you want to go through these at your leisure, then feel free to pay a visit here and just fork it or do whatever you want with it. It's all open to the public. So everything is stored there, and that also has a reason, because I want my configuration to be available and portable. This is something that I learned from RWX Rob, which is a YouTuber influencer, and I consider him to be my mentor, even though I have never really spoken to him one-to-one. But my entire setup, my entire philosophy is based on his philosophy as well. And he has this idea that the repo should be portable. So I should be able to go to any system, maybe Linux, or it should be Unix-based, of course. But I should be able to pull in that repo and run a script, and I should be ready to go. Well, I'm not completely there yet. I do have some scripts in here that help me set up. It's not completely automated yet, but the whole point is that I can pull it in and then be up and running very quickly. And that's why I also store everything in GitHub publicly, so it's easily reached. But I also get version control on it, so I try to be very diligent on my commit messages as well, so I know exactly what I changed and when, so I can revert it when I want to. So these contain all of my dot files, and in terms of dot file placement, I use this convention of the xdg config home. So if I do xdg, you will see that I have an environment variable which is set in my bash RC, and this points to this .config file, which is a convention. You can look it up, xdg config home, and you'll see that there's a whole convention based around this. So that's about it for my dot files and how I store them and the principles behind it. So then I'm going to be moving over to the OS part of things. I started out using Linux as a DevOps engineer. That's where my main focus was, and it has been a great learning experience to build my own Arch Linux desktop from scratch. But it's also where I learned the concept of a window manager and really got to know the internals of a Linux system. But as I started working as a consultant, which means that I'll be doing a lot of separate projects at many different customers, I figured that having a custom-built Arch Linux setup was not going to be the most optimal, because it will also require me very often to run several VPN configurations, and it also there is a risk there. Even though Arch Linux never broke on me, there is a possibility that it breaks on you. So I decided to move over to macOS. I chose macOS because it's also Unix based, and I have several other Apple devices. And when I first saw how an iPhone interacts with a MacBook, so I can copy something on my MacBook and paste it on my iPhone, I was basically sold on the ecosystem. So that made sense, and it's also a Unix-based operating system. So it has a Unix file system, which I'm used to from my time on Linux. So it seemed like a very, very good option, and it is also very, very stable. So I don't regret the choice at all. I still have Ubuntu on my ThinkPad back in the living room. I will never stop using Linux, of course. It's an awesome setup and ecosystem. But in terms of a very stable workhorse and also for creative work, I decided to go for macOS. And in this note that I included here, I also went into that in a bit more detail. But here I wrote 3 things: compatibility, portability, and stability. And if you want to read more about those, then feel free to download the mind map and take a look at it, or pause the video as I was scrolling through it. On macOS, I use Brew as much as possible. It's a package manager, and I can install packages from the command line. This is mainly because then it's easier to keep everything updated. So with just one command, I can update all of the binaries that are installed on my system. And on Linux, I use apt as a package manager on Ubuntu-based systems, of course. On Arch, I was of course using Pacman, but I don't have a Arch Linux installation running currently. But using Linux so much is also where my fascination with Vim also started. I started using Linux when I was 16. And I had to configure a lot of servers, and I had this need of editing text files everywhere, and that's also where my skills with Vim were born, and also where I fell in love with it. Next in my workflow, and it's a very, very important and large part of my workflow, is the terminal. So a terminal is like back in the old days, which I didn't experience, of course, but you had these huge computers, and then you had to attach a machine to actually put in commands into the computer. That's a terminal. These days we have a terminal emulator, and the one that I chose is Alacritty, because when you purchase a Mac then or install Ubuntu, there is already a terminal on there. but there are several ways of running a terminal on your system, and I chose Alacritty. Now, I have a few reasons why I use Alacritty. I like Alacritty because it's minimal and it's very lightweight, because it also doesn't have a lot of features. It has infinite configuration possibilities, but in its base, it's very, very minimal. And I like its philosophy and opinionated. Those are related terms. But as I was researching several options, I was also considering, for example, iTerm 2 and all those resource-heavy programs. But those always have the possibility of creating tabs up in the terminal, right? Well, as I came across Alacritty, I was reading through some GitHub issues where people were asking, "Hey, how do I create windows? How do I create several windows?" And then people said, "No, you should just learn Tmux. Tmux already does that. We don't need to build that into our terminal." And that basically sold me on Alacritty. That sort of way of, there's already a program on most Unix-based systems that does that, so why would we have to build in that functionality in our terminal emulator just so you can click it? And yeah, I really, really like that, and I basically went with Alacritty, and I never stopped using it. I picked that because it runs everywhere, so I am sometimes forced to use Windows or other operating systems, and then at least I know that I can install Alacritty there, and know that I can bring the config that I already have, and that I can have the terminal that I'm used to. It's also very, very fast, and it's even GPU accelerated. And you might think, why do you need speed in a terminal? But you do see a difference when you're running Ansible playbooks, for example. In Alacritty, it scrolls very smoothly, whereas in other terminals, I noticed that it can be very choppy. So the configuration of Alacritty happens in using alacritty.toml. It used to be YAML, but recently they have changed. And I'm in my dotfiles repo now. I, of course, have it cloned on my local system. So I will just open the Alacritty toml here. And as you see, it is quite minimal. I've done some quite minimal changes to it. I use a Groovebox dark theme for it, and I changed the font size and the font. And I set this window decorations none, which means that there's no sort of file tab or anything. You don't see a border around the window. As you see, there is like a couple of millimeters, which I've configured in my window manager. So if I open up another terminal here, then you see there's a few millimeters between them, just so I can see the distinction. But you see that there is absolutely nothing else to the window at all. No borders, nothing. So that's what that decorations none does. And there is a little bit of padding in there as well. But that's basically all that I've configured for the terminal emulator. Like I said, I like to keep things minimal. And the font that I use is the Ubuntu Mono nerd font. These nerd fonts, those are like hacked fonts that contain more symbols and everything. You can look that up. I think it's called hack fonts or nerd fonts anyway. But I like the Ubuntu Mono font. I've been using Ubuntu for years and years and years, and that's of course always the default font that you get there. But I just really like the look of it somehow. It's just a very comfortable fonts to be reading. I used JetBrains Mono, and I experimented with a few other ones, but this is always the one that keeps me most focused and which feels most pleasant. So that's about it for the Alacritty configuration, I think. Like I said, you can view the config file if you want on there. But yeah, just to round that off, Alacritty does not provide any sort of way of creating multiple windows or panes or anything like that. all of that is handled by Tmux. So that's all I use for, I only use Alacritty for sort of rendering my terminal on my system. Now in the terminal, we have a shell. So a terminal is nothing without a shell, and the shell of my choice is bash. Now this is of course a source of heated debates everywhere, but the thing is that when you buy a Mac machine, the shell that's in there is Z shell, and the first thing I do is to completely disable that as soon as possible, because I don't want to use Z shell. I did use it for a year, and it's a fine setup. It gets you very nice, pretty little prompts and colors and all that. But the thing is that this is a point that RWX-Rob makes repeatedly, is that Bash is the default Linux shell. When you install Ubuntu, Z shell is not on there. When you run a container with Alpine or Ubuntu or anything, you will not find Z shell in there. You will find Bash or POSIX shell. And that's also why I decided to go full Bash. I don't use Z shell because I want to be fluent in the shell that I use on all the systems that I'm managing. So these days I'm not logging into virtual machines a lot anymore. I don't manage those a lot anymore, but it does happen. And when I do, when I'm in there, the shell that's always there is Bash. So if I am in there and I'm used to using Z shell and I need all my pretty prompts and all my Z shell specific configurations, you're going to have a problem, right? So you don't want to be dependent on that at all. When I run a Docker container, Docker run it Ubuntu, here if I do echo shell, the shell is bin bash, not Z shell. And that's the reason why I use bash for everything. And I'm not going to be spending much more time on that. Just use bash, learn bash scripting, and you'll thank me later, because it's one of the biggest assets that I have as a DevOps engineer. Don't use Z shell. Next in my configuration is Tmux. Tmux is a way of creating windows and panes for me. It also has the possibility to have sessions. So if you are on a virtual machine and you run Tmux on there and you somehow get disconnected, then your session will still keep running on there. So that's also why it's so useful to become fluent with Tmux. And the way I have configured Tmux is very much based on the way RWX-Rob has done it. I've stolen a lot from his Tmux config. But as you see, when if I were to create a new Alacritty window here, and if I do another Docker run it Ubuntu, if I, let's do an update and just install Tmux on there, I'll show you how Tmux looks like out of the box. Apt install Tmux. Let's install that. So then now I'm in my Ubuntu container, and if I run Tmux, this is how it looks. So you have this ugly green bar down at the bottom, and if I split the window or create a new one, then you will see that it creates ones down here. And this is fine. I used it like this for quite a while, but eventually I thought it was so ugly to have this green bar under there. So what I do now is this is my terminal, but it's running Tmux already. And you see up here that there is one window open. So if I create a new window, then you will see that another one is opened. And this is how I usually have it. So in my first window, I usually have my second brain, which is my entire Zettelkasten and contains all of my nodes. Then in the second window, I will be doing my code. For example, if I go to my lab repo or my home lab repo, then here I will be having my code open like this, or my deployment. Here I will be coding, and if I then need to look up something else, then I would be browsing my file system as I need it. So say I'm in my home lab repo, and then I want to look up something that I have in my lab repo, then I would just go to my lab, and then I'll search here and see how did I do this with the network policy, for example. And here is then an example of a network policy that I had somewhere, and then I just switch over to this one. Like if I would go here and I yank this out, I would go here and then I can paste it in. So here you see how I use Tmux for switching between windows and how I utilize that. The thing is that you can have windows, but you can also have panes. So here I'm splitting it up. So if I, for example, just log into my production cluster and I want to be monitoring a deployment, for example, and if I have my pods here, and then if I would push this to my GitOps repo, then I can see down below that my changes are taking effect because new pods are being deployed, for example. So in a typical workday, I will probably have about 3 or 4 windows open like this. And very often I will have a pane where I have, like I showed you, K9S and then another thing below. So I might have K9S down here, and here I will have a Flux Git customizations. And so here I see what Flux is doing, and if I would push something, then I can see the changes on there. And then I just switch between these windows as I go along. Now, when configuring Tmux, many people have created keybinds for Tmux, which are deviating from the standard. So to create a new window on Tmux, you do Control-B and then C. Now, I very, very consciously chose not to deviate from those defaults. And not, again, because I'm going to be logging into systems which have Tmux there, and I want to be fluent with the keybinds already. I don't want to be looking up the keybinds. I don't want to remember how it is. So the Tmux keybinds are horrible. I don't like them at all. But I promise you, if you learn them, if you get them in the fingers or in the muscle memory, it is not that bad. It actually works quite well. But I chose to do it this way because then everywhere where I am, I can always just use the default keybinds, and I know that I will be able to switch between panes, create new windows, and it's not going to be a problem at all. So that is how I utilize Tmux for my workflow. It is a very central part of my workflow. Like RDLBX Rob says this thing that Tmux is my window manager, and yeah, Tmux is my window manager. Like I do most of my work from the command line. All of my text editing, writing my notes, everything like that happens from the command line. And all of this, when I do it from the command line, is always done through Tmux. So when I close down all of my windows, you will see that here, if I stop this, you will see that I started up my terminal on Wednesday. So this has been open for quite a while. It's Sunday now. And then first thing I do is open Tmux, and then I start working from there. Everything happens in Tmux. So in terms of Tmux configuration, let's see, Tmux. Where is my tmux.conf? Here, v.tmux.conf there. So in terms of configuration, I don't have a lot of it. I have a history limit on there, and ironically, I say I have a keyboard-based workflow, but sometimes it's damn handy to click something if you can't get it to work. So I do have the mouse option on. It is, I don't know why I said this. I wrote for Neovim, so it was probably necessary. Of course, I said VI mode for copy mode. So when you have a ton of things running, Then you go to copy mode, and now I can scroll my history, and I can move around here using Vim key bindings. And if I want to select something, then I would go here. I press space, you select, and then press enter. And then if I then paste it, then you have the stuff here. So this can be very helpful if you want to be copying terminal output. So let's say I'm writing a document and I want to paste in that output that I just copied. It's very easy for me to just switch over, copy it, and then paste it into a document like that. But since I use Vim, I use the VI key bindings, and then I can just use my familiar navigation when I'm doing those things. The status bar has been styled. This is basically stolen from RWX Rob, and he has this amazing little program called Pomo. So if I do Pomo start, then you'll see up here on the top right corner, there is a tomato there, which is a Pomodoro timer, and it's counting down from 50 minutes. And this helps me to sort of do my work in chunks, and I use that fairly regularly as well. But yeah, let's just keep the Pomo running. Why not? Next, I have the count the panes from 1. So if you see up here, the panes are called 1, 2, 3. Normally it's 0, 1, 2, and I like to have it as a number 1. And here are some color configurations, and yeah, that's basically it. Very, very little configuration of Tmux as a whole. But it is a extremely useful tool, and it's the very center of my workflow, I would say. Tmux really is my window manager. Rounding off on Tmux, the last thing I wanted to say is that what I try to do here is that to, like I said, create something that's minimal and distraction free. So as you see here, when I open a new window, you see just black screen, right? There's nothing to distract you. This really helps me to focus completely, and it is a very, very, very comfortable setup to be working in, and I totally love it. I have tended to change things quite a lot, but when I arrived to this config, it has been around for 8 months already, and I'm still super happy with it, with the colors, how it looks, how it feels, everything. One last thing before we move over to the next section is that I realized I forgot to go through my bash RC for here. And well, like I said, it is available on in my dotfiles repo, so I don't have to go through the entire thing. It basically speaks for itself, but just to go over it very quickly. I mainly use it for setting environment variables and configuring my path. And further, I have quite a lot of aliases. So here I set up the SSH agent, and otherwise I have a lot of aliases. So my V alias, you'll see me using V a lot, which is an alias for Neovim. I have all of these sort of aliases. For example, if I want to go to my lab repo, I just type lab, and then I am in this lab directory. And yeah, I have all sorts of little aliases and things that help me navigate around with just typing a couple of letters, and that help me work more quickly and more efficiently. So that's basically everything that's happening here in the bash RC. Just a few aliases, the environment variables, and sourcing completion scripts. And that's basically it. So yeah, that was a very quick rundown of the bash RC. And if you want to know more, just feel free to read it in my dotfiles repo. Then let's move on to the next section, which is of course Neovim. So Neovim, this is besides from Tmux, this is a real core of my workflow. I do most, if not all, my editing in Vim, Neovim. And yeah, it is, I just love it so much. It's strange that you can get an attachment to an editor like this, but it is just such an efficient, such a beautiful way of working that I can never imagine myself working with something else. Even if I have to use a different editor, I would always still use the Vim key bindings, because those are usually available in editors as well. But I'm going to be continuing working with Vim for as long as I can. Now, I starting on Vim, I had, like everybody else, I was just using the normal Vim, and I had no configuration whatsoever, and I just started slowly building up my Vim RC and yeah, configuring it as I went along. So I didn't start with an example config. I really went with the basic stuff, and then sort of adjusted it as along the needs arose. Later, I then switched to Neovim, because I was starting to require more language server capabilities, and I also wanted to learn Lua, and I thought I didn't want to get too... I started to get a few needs that would require a lot of Vim script configuration, and I was talking to a very senior friend of mine who is a Vim master, and he advised me not to get into Vim script and just go for the Lua configuration instead, and I don't regret it. So I use Vim for both my coding, but also for my note-taking, for my Zettelkasten, and for writing documents for work, for everything. And now I'm going to go through the entire setup. I won't be going through the entire Vim config file. I think I'm going to do that in a separate video. This is just to show you how I use Vim and what it looks like in my workflow. So my Vim config is set up using LazyVim. I went through several iterations of Neovim. First, I, of course, built my own thing. I started from scratch and built my own. Then I started using kickstart.nvim by TJ de Vries, which is also a really great way to get things going. But then later I discovered LazyVim, and I've been on LazyVim for over half a year now, and I'm not going back. Lazy is a plugin manager for Neovim, but the developer has actually created a whole Vim, call it distribution around it, and you can get it. Let's see, LazyVim. You can get it here at lazyvim.org. I highly recommend it. You can just run it in a Docker container to get started. And it is, a great setup. Everything works out of the box. And especially, the main reason I went for LazyVim is because I spent several weekends on configuring my LSP. And even though my language server settings, and even though it worked eventually, it was never quite right. And LazyVim just comes with a very sane LSP configuration out of the box. And it just works. It just works. It's beautiful. So, yeah, that brings me to the next section already, LSP and Mason. So if I just open a file here and I will go to a random deployment file, then if you run the command lsp info, then you will see that you have a language server running on your document. This helps me, like you can spec, this helps me, for example, write things. You get suggestions as you write new files. It helps with indentation. So if I indent this and I write again, then you see that it was put back. All these things. And also when you're writing, working in larger code bases, you can hop between files or jump to the definition of a function. And that's what you need a language server for. And language servers are language servers are handled by Mason. So this is Mason. This is a program to install and update language servers. So as you see, I haven't been updating my language servers for a while. So if you press G question mark, then you will see the keybinds for this. So let's see, update all outdated packages. Let's do that right now. And then you will see here that down here you will see a few changes and that it's already updating all my language servers. So I used to do this myself and update the packages on my system, etc. And just a lot of hassle. Mason is great because you also get to browse language servers. Like you can just here, you can see all of the language servers that are available to you, and it's very easy to install them. You just include them in your configuration and it installs it automatically. And as you saw, it was very easy to update things as well. Next, for highlighting and formatting documents and such like, I use TreeSitter, like basically everybody else on Neovim. Not much to say about that really. If I go to my config, I don't have much custom config on that. I just have the languages that I want to have, where I want to have syntax highlighting for, and that's basically it. Let's see, is there anything else in the config that I would like to talk to about at this point? Well, here's my LSP config. So here you will see it starts throwing a few errors. That's something that I'm working on, but don't mind the errors. But if I want to install Bicep in my language servers, I just add the Bicep here in this list, and then Mason will handle the rest. Next we have Markdown. So in Neovim, I do most of my writing I do all of my writing in Markdown basically. I take notes in Markdown for my Zettelkasten. My blog is entirely written in Markdown, and then it's converted to a HTML website by Hugo. When I write documents for work, it's in Markdown, and yeah, it's all Markdown. And the best way to write Markdown and the way to highlight it in Neovim, I think, is using Pandoc. So Pandoc is actually a engine to convert and generate documents, and basically you can convert formats, and it's for creating books and things like that. But I use it mainly for my syntax highlighting. So if I go to my second brain, and if I open up a file, let's see, my home lab K3S file, here you will see that when I have a document here, then here is a Markdown heading. But when you select it, you see that it has this hashtag, this bracket. But when I go down, it has this sort of beautiful little S symbol. I really like that. And it formats the document quite nicely. I like how it does the quotation marks. So if you see when I select the line, then the quotation marks are like this. But when I go below it, the quotation marks are formatted like that. So it brings it to the forefront a little bit more. And if I want to sort of highlight this bit or make that bold, then in Markdown you put asterisk around it, but here it will render it as bold as well. So I thought this was a very nice way of displaying Markdown as I'm editing it, and that's basically how I use how I use Markdown. And then when I'm writing Markdown, especially when I'm writing larger documents for work, like large technical documents, then I like to do the Markdown preview. And then here it will, in my browser, it opens up the Markdown. And if I then move that to my workspace here, where I'm also writing the Markdown file, here we go, then you will see that if I scroll through it, then the browser will also keep scrolling through it. So let's open up a, let's see, is there a, let's open up a different document that is a bit more, that has a bit more things in it. So markdown preview. This is just a random note that I have on my home lab. And as you see here, then if I scroll through it, it renders it beautifully. And this is very useful when I'm writing technical documentation for work, because sometimes when you're writing markdown, it helps to see it rendered and to structure the thing as you want it to have. So that's the markdown preview. I will go over how I switch these windows and how all of that works in the next section. So be patient. I will get to it if you're wondering about that. But that's the markdown section of my Neovim setup. And yeah, just to go through that very quickly, I keep a Zettelkasten for all my nodes, and my Zettelkasten is part of a larger thing that is called a second brain, which is a place where I basically organize my entire life. But my Zettelkasten is organized as a it's basically markdown files on my local disk. And it is compatible with Obsidian. If you are familiar with that tool, that's what I have open here as well. It's an Obsidian vault, but I basically use Neovim to navigate my Zettelkasten. So here, this is my entire second brain, and here I have it set up as according to the para method by Tiago Forte. I'm going to be creating a second brain video where I go through my entire second brain setup later, and I'm also going to create a video specifically on how I combine Obsidian and Neovim in my workflow, in my Zettelkasten work. But for now, let's just go here, and here you will see, like for example, my home lab nodes are in this home lab directory, and here I have all of these documents that I have here. And when I am doing when I want to search around my entire sort of knowledge base, so let's say I need to find something about customize. If I then grab for customize, then here I see all of the files that I have with the word customize in it, and then I can very quickly navigate to that file. So all of my nodes, they live as local files on my disk. They are of course being backed up. And I also wrote an entire article about how this is set up, which will be linked down below. It's on my blog. But that is basically how I use markdown files for my note-taking and for which helps me to learn and to keep that knowledge accessible. The last section about Neovim is going to be a few plugins that I use. So you've just seen me use a plugin that I use, well, every day, probably 4 times an hour. You basically saw me doing it. If I press space and then FF for find files, if I want to find something about running, then I have everything about running here. And that is the beauty of the Telescope plugin, is that here I have all the files that have running in the file names. But when I browse the files like this, I see the preview of it, and I can even scroll the preview. So if I have this is a file which is a bit larger. If I press Ctrl D, I can even quickly scroll through the preview. So you can imagine how useful this is if you are navigating a huge knowledge base like my second brain. If you have everything organized like this and you can just search through it from your editor, this is super powerful. So yeah, like I was showing you, if I go to my home lab repo, say, and I open up my Telescope plugin and I want to have the deployment for Mealy, then I have it open here, And then I think, oh wait, maybe I should also have the networking for Mealy. I just do network Mealy, and as you see, it used Fuzzy Finder to open the file, and now I have my networking file and deployment open, and look how quickly I searched that. And as I'm editing the networking file, I realize, oh wait, the LinkedIn networking is also very similar to this. I want to read that. So I go to link and then netwo, and I see, oh, here's the networking file for LinkedIn. Now let's vsplit that window, and now I have the LinkedIn and the networking YAML side by side, and I can compare them, and you get the point? This is why it's so powerful to use this. This is why it's so powerful to be able to quickly search files using Telescope. I can also use grep. So if I want to find ingress resources, then here I have all the files that have ingress in it. So if I'm comparing ingresses, I have the comma feed ingress here. And if I want another one, then I can have a different one here. And this is how it's so powerful, and to be able to find these documents very quickly. Telescope is, the center of my Vim workflow. I could not live without Telescope, and that's also the main reason why I stick on Neovim. I had this phase where I wanted to move away from Neovim again. I wanted to use the standard Vim, but I very quickly found out that I need Telescope in my workflow. Easy as that. It's just the fastest way of finding files using a fuzzy file finder like this. It's just so powerful. So yeah, Telescope, learn it, highly recommended. The next plugin is LazyGit. So you will have seen me use this in my files a lot, I think. But if I were to be in my home lab repo, and if I open up a random file here, and if I want to say change the database resources on this database, then I would change this to 3, and I write the file. And if I then want to push that to my GitHub repo, then instead of exiting, and I do git add dot, and then I would do git commit and then git push. But you have something that's called LazyGit, which you can either run from the command line like this. I can do LazyGit and then it opens up, or as I am in my, let's open up that file again. So now I'm pressing R. So then I get all of the recent files. So here I'm in my database file again. And then as I'm editing the file, I can do space GG. And then here I can do add all the files, commit, write, increase CPU. I can do it and then push. And then now it's pushed to my repo. So you see how quickly that is, how easy that was. It's just, I'm writing something, I want to have it pushed, so GG, A, C, and push, and then I'm gone. Another one here, I'm not going to push this, but say I want to change this, A, C, write a commit message, and then enter P and push, and it's pushed to the origin. And it's so powerful. It works so quick, and sometimes I have to force myself to keep writing the git commands so I don't forget them. But LazyGit has really sped up my git commits and my all-around git workflow. Highly recommended. Next, I have Neotree. You already saw me using that. Let's just restore everything. Git restore dot. Here we go. You saw me using that. If I press space E, then this file tree opens, and this is really useful when navigating file structures like this. My Zettelkasten is basically just one large directory, but here I have in my home lab repo, I have my applications, I have my infrastructure. So this is very useful for opening up the let's say the GitOps the Weave UI for my production cluster, I can very easily navigate it like this. But say I have this staging environment, and I want to copy all of that into a new environment, which is called test. I can create a test directory like this. I paste it, and lo and behold, all of the stuff is in my test directory here as well. So it's also very useful for managing files very quickly. So I very often, even though I'm not editing text files, I just use this to quickly move files around and structure something, because I use my Vim key bindings, and it works just really well. So this is a very, very nice way of managing files in Neovim, and it's all controlled from the keyboard. So I like it a lot. And yeah, that concludes the very quick overview of my Neovim setup. I don't want to go too deep into it, because this video is about my entire workflow. But if you want to know more about my Neovim config, you can of course look in my dotfiles repo. And I highly suggest you check out LazyVim. And if you want to have a full sort of walkthrough of my entire Vim config, let me know in the comments below, and I will make a video for you. All right, we're in the home stretch. I actually got myself a cup of coffee to get some energy to keep myself talking. And the next section that we have on the schedule is the window manager. So I learned the concept of a window manager while I was building my own Arch Linux system. And ever since I started working with a window manager, I never looked back. I think it's a very, very nice way of handling your operating system. And what a window manager does is that when I have this terminal open here, if I just open a new one, you will see it will open up a new one next to it, and it will resize the other one. And if I open another one, it will resize it like this, and I can just keep opening terminals like this. Or if I were to, say, open a different program like Chrome, like this, and then if I go here, if I move that to my 3, then it will resize it like this. So that is that is a very nice way instead of having to drag around or resizing your windows with the mouse, it just does that for you. And I really like that of a window manager. Now, when I was on Arch Linux, I wasn't as proficient with Tmux yet. So then I confess I was using this kind of setup where I had multiple terminals and I was switching between them like this. Now I just use Tmux for that. So just to demonstrate a similar configuration that I had just now, I would just split this window like this and split that window again. So here I can have K9S. Here I can have my code opened like this. Let's open up a secrets.yaml, and then I can switch between those by doing Control B O, and here I could have htop and all sorts of things opening. And this is all in Tmux, so I can switch between these windows, and it's just in Tmux. I don't need a window manager for that anymore. So this is again this point of Tmux is my window manager. However, a window manager is darn handy when I'm moving files around, or when I do have other programs as a terminal open. So of course I use a web browser a lot, and as you see me, if you're following the keys that I'm pressing, then you see that I'm always pressing Command 1 and 2 and 3. So macOS has this concept of workspaces, I think it's called. Is it called workspaces? Workspaces. Well, or it's called like that in Linux. But if I go, how do I open that? Is it mission control? yeah, desktops, that's the word. So you have desktops up here, and I have 9 of them. These are all numbered 1 to 9. And I switch between those by pressing the command and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So on 8, I always have my calendar, for example. And on 7, I always have my Slack if it's open. On 3, I always have my terminal. And on 1, I always have my browser. So I can very quickly, if I'm coding and I want to look something up, then I can very quickly just move to my browser here and open up a new tab and yeah, go to ChatGPT or whatever. So I can very quickly switch between those applications. So that's what I like about having a window manager like this. And this is not even the window manager doing this. This is just a macOS thing with the desktops and workspaces. That's what it's called in GNOME on Ubuntu, I think. But that's just a macOS feature. And then I have in terms of window management, like it does here, then I have Amethyst. This is a program called Amethyst. It's a free program and it works very well. But the thing that's very useful for that is that I can use Amethyst to move programs between my desktops. I don't think macOS supports that actually. So I'm now switching to 3 and I'm coding here, and I have all these things open and I want to look something up. So I switch to this and I'm talking to ChatGPT, but say I want to use that information in my code, then I can press these buttons and then it moves to the workspace that has my terminal. So let's clean that up a little bit because I'm getting a bit panicked about this. Okay, here we go. So now I can be editing my code. I can have my code open like this, and let's see, let's open a random file here. So I have my code open and I can have my browser beside me here. So I can freely move things around just by the keyboard. So now my 1 is empty. I am in my browser, but now I have finished my browser. I just want to go back I wanted to go back. So I press Control-Shift-Option-1, and then it moves back to workspace 1. And now I have my workspace 3 in my as a terminal again. And now I have workspace 1 as my browser again, like I'm used to. So that's the main thing that I use the window manager for. Not so much the capabilities of the tiling like this, the quarter tiling and so forth. But it is really handy that I can move windows to several screens as well. So with Control-Shift-Option-H, I'm now moving the browser to the screen that's to my left here. So I have 3 screens. I have my main 4K screen over here. Then I have my MacBook over there, which is open. It's just my open MacBook. But to my left here, I have a 2K screen, which I use for, having stuff open, like documents when I'm coding or when I need to have those separated like that. But with the window manager, I can move the windows between the screens, which is really handy. So that is what I use for window management on macOS. And as I described earlier, Tmux is basically my window manager for all my terminal applications. Now, almost there. The next thing is my browser. And I see here, I must, you can see, this also shows you how I do this kind of work. I have this brush here, and then I'm going to connect these like this. Right, so now it's looking a lot better. My browser is Edge. I've tried many different browsers, like everybody in this space, I suppose. I have used Firefox for years. I was very happy with that. When I switched to macOS, I tried Safari, but I wasn't very happy with it because I couldn't use that on Linux, for example, and I wanted to have my things synced between those environments. And when Microsoft came out with Copilot or Bing search. That was actually quite new. ChatGPT wasn't able to search the internet at that point. And when I saw that, I actually switched to Edge because it was so powerful to combine search with ChatGPT. And that's why I switched to Edge then. And I have since discovered that it actually integrates very well with the Microsoft Authenticator. This is what I used on my iPhone for all of my passwords and two-factor authentication. I had several different apps for that, and I consolidated that to the Microsoft Authenticator. And I think that works very well. And by using Edge, I have that across all of my systems. So Edge runs on Linux, on Windows, and on Mac. So for now, I'm quite happy with Edge as a browser. But like I said, my system is always under continuous development, so maybe I will try something else in the future. But Edge is my main browser. I have used Firefox. I also used the LibreWolf for when I want to have more privacy when I'm browsing, or Tor. But for my day-to-day work and just my normal stuff, I have Edge. And then the last part of my workflow is actually my Zettelkasten. I went into this in a previous section a little bit, but it is such an important part of my workflow, because when I'm coding and I remember, I don't know, something, a Go function like that, then here, look how quickly I have found my note on variadic functions in Go, right? I can switch between these things so quickly, and it is a huge part of my workflow. I keep notes on almost everything I do. Every time I learn something new, I will stick it in a note. So say I am, let's not use code as an example, but I'm using the Azure CLI, and I'm trying to do some work with the Azure CLI. Then if I forget how I work with the Azure CLI and key vaults, then let's say I was doing that in this window. I go to Vim, I open Telescope, and then I have this Azure CLI node. And in here I will search for key vault, and then here I have all of the commands that I have saved for key vaults. That's just so powerful to have my own knowledge base so easily accessible, and that is why I have my Zettelkasten as markdown files locally saved on my system here. Because the combination of Neovim with Telescope is just so amazingly powerful, and I'm super happy with this, and it's a huge part of my workflow. And if you want to read more about my Zettelkasten, my note-taking, you should go to my blog here, mishavandenberg.com. If you go to the Start Here page, I have my favorites, and here is an article called My Neovim Zettelkasten. This is why here I write why I keep a Zettelkasten, how I do it, and my website is actually the part of my Zettelkasten that I publish to the public, which contains mainly technical notes and documentation that I make. So it is such an integral part of my workflow that I decided to include it here, even though it was not necessarily a part of like Window Manager or the terminal, but it's so important to my workflow that it is there. And then I also use Obsidian. Obsidian is the way I started using Notion, and then I had a few other tools, and I ended up with Obsidian, and that introduced me to the having the local files as markdown files on your computer, and then I just started editing those with Vim. So I don't use Obsidian for my writing my notes or navigating them so much, but it is really handy because if I go out of full screen mode here, so these drawings are made in Excalibur, and Excalibur is now also integrated into Obsidian, which is transforming the way I take notes. I will be be making videos on this in the future as well. But that's one way, and also the Obsidian has this graph view. So this is a visual representation of all the nodes that are in my Zettelkasten. And if I go here, this is Amsterdam. This is one of the places where I worked. So here you see all of the nodes that are connected to that specific part of my Zettelkasten. And here you can see how they are all interlinked. So here I have another thing, let's say Arch Linux Desktop. And here you see all of the nodes that are linked to that. And I can if I go to that node, if I open that, and then I can also have the local graph. You see, I don't do this very much, but let's see, how is it? Local graph here. So here you also see all of the nodes that are connected to it. And if I want to do the MPD music player, here I can navigate these nodes as well and sort of see the connections between them. So this is a very, very useful way of exploring your nodes, and it's a lot fun to play around with it as well. So yeah, Obsidian is definitely a part of the workflow too. My use of Obsidian is going to increase more and more in the future as I'm starting to go more into visual note taking, and I'll be making videos about that as well. But yeah, it's another very integral part of my workflow. So ending in Obsidian, I'll open up the mind map. We started with GitHub, and we have gone in clockwise fashion, and we have I've spoken through all of the topics that I had prepared for this video. You have seen my entire workflow. This is how I work every day. I code, I write notes, and I look up those notes as I'm coding, and it becomes this very nice little feedback loop. And yeah, these are the principles for that workflow that I've created. And I hope this was useful to you. I hope this has inspired you to maybe put some work into your own workflow. My configuration is available for free in my repo. You can just go in there and take whatever you like and be inspired. I have also stolen a lot of my configuration from RWX Rob, so that's how it works in this world. There's no shame on taking other people's configuration if they publish them to the public like that in public repos. And if you want to know more about my workflow, feel free to just ask a question in the comments below. I write about it on my blog. You will be able to read more about it there. I'll be publishing this mind map with the extra notes as well, which will be in the comments in the video description. And yeah, that's about it, I think. If you found this useful at all, please give me a like and a comment and everything for the algorithm. And consider subscribing to my channel if you like my style and what I'm doing here. And please let me know in the comments if you derived any value from this. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good day.